This took place back in the summer of 2014, when I was 25 years old. I live in Germany, and at the time, I had just become interested in BDSM. Basically, the whole whips and chains deal. It's not for everyone, but more people are into it than you'd think. Something like 20% of people fantasize about it. So, if you have 4 other friends, chances are one of you is a secret sadomasochist. If it isn't you, then you can have some fun speculating about which of your pals it might be. The problem for me at the time was that it's not the easiest thing to experiment with, especially when you're not in an established relationship. I don't think there's any smooth way to bring it up on a date or with girls at the bar, unless it's some sort of sex bar or something like that. That's when I had the bright idea to become a member of a fairly well-known BDSM website, just so I could finally chat about the subject with other like-minded people. And who knows, maybe see where things went from there. It was a surprisingly positive experience right off the bat. Everyone I chatted to was so friendly and welcoming, and I have to tell you, I learned more than a thing or two that doesn't bear repeating here. Like I said, I talked to quite a few people on the site, but one stood out. A redhead with a username that translates into Mistress Honey. She messaged me about 2 weeks into me becoming a member, saying that I was just her type and that she wanted to get to know me better. Scrolling through her photos, I was pleasantly surprised. Rocking body, pretty face, and from the things she'd type, kinky as all hell. Jackpot. Over the course of a day or two, Mistress Honey told me that her real name was Yasmin, and that she thought I'd make a perfect subordinate, someone she could dominate in the bedroom. Well, I don't know about you guys, but to me that sounded pretty good, just what I was into. But I confessed that I wasn't really experienced with the whole BDSM thing, and since she seemed like she'd been around the block a few times, I might not be what she's looking for. She seemed to be really understanding and eager to teach me all she knew. It genuinely was quite surprising how all these sadomasochists were actually really nice and welcoming, at least online. I tried to organise a meet-up between the two of us, but she was either never available or had to cancel last minute. She suggested one night that I should go over to her place for a night of fun instead, skip the pleasantries and get straight down to business. In hindsight, it was a stupid idea, but I replied to her message asking for her address. I knew she lived close by, but didn't know exactly where. She sends it over, and it's only a 30-minute drive away. Perfect. Not so far as to be impractical, but far enough that if it goes awkwardly, it's not like I'm going to bump into her in the streets afterwards. I message her back, saying that I'll be at her place in the next hour or so. She replied with a winky face. Hopping in my car and tapping her details into my GPS, I'll admit that I was a little bit nervous about the upcoming encounter. Not because I foresaw trouble or anything, but because, honestly, it had been a while since I'd last been with a woman, and now I was diving headfirst into a world of latex. Still, I guess this was sink or swim time. And besides, she was going to be the dominant one during the course of the evening, which had to be the harder job in practice, right? All I had to do was endure a little whipping, a bit of handcuff burn, and just enjoy the ride. This and other thoughts were swirling in my head as I drove the route highlighted on the machine, until I was nearing my destination. It was a lot more rural than I had first anticipated. I carefully drove down this thin, country road, engulfed by trees so thick they blocked out all of the moonlight, my headlights the only thing illuminating my path. You have reached your destination. I pulled up outside this tatty-looking farmhouse. Now, this really wasn't what I was expecting. It was so secluded and abandoned looking. There was still a fair amount of distance from my vehicle to the house, so still time to pull out. But something compelled me to stay. No prizes for guessing what that thing was. A 3-letter word ending in X. A light was on in what I presumed was the bedroom, the top right window of the house. Looking up, I saw that the window blinds were parted ever so slightly, and a pair of female eyes were peering down at me through the slats. Well, she knows I'm here, I figured. Can't turn back now. Checking my phone one last time, she had dropped me a message saying that the door was open and to just come on inside. Like all her messages, it ended in that winky face. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the car and approached her front door. Sure enough, it was open, and with a push, I stepped into the small entranceway. It was almost pitch black inside. I could barely see a damn thing. Immediately, I was hit by the faint smell of latex. Whoa, she really was hardcore into this stuff. Not knowing whether it was breaking the roleplay immersion or not, I called out to Yasmin. Silence. Yasmin? I called out again, a little louder this time. Still, nothing. I fondled the wall in search of a light switch, but couldn't seem to find anything. Was she expecting me to just head to the bedroom right away? I paused and stood motionless for a moment, listening intently for any signs of movement in the house. From what I could tell, there was a slight moaning coming from upstairs. My mind was running wild with what she might be doing up there. Using the phone in my pocket as a light source, I slowly made my way up the stairs with trepidation, up to where I believed Yasmin was. I reached the top of the stairs. To my left, the hallway was completely black, and could have gone on forever for all I could tell. To my right was the door to Yasmin's bedroom, light seeping out from a crack in the slightly open door. This was definitely where the sounds were coming from, a tad louder now, and strangely distorted. I composed myself, let out an excited breath, and walked into the room. As soon as I entered, I knew I had made a massive mistake. By the window, strategically positioned, was a cardboard cutout of a female, made to look as if it was peering out of the window shades. The walls were covered in magazine pages, calendars, and cutouts of scantily clad or naked women. All that was in the room was a massive bed, large straps and chains attached to the posts, a large camera on a tripod aimed at it. Next to it, a table holding a various selection of tools, ranging from sex toys to knives and other blades. The moaning was coming from a porn movie playing on a television set. What the actual fuck was this? Certainly not what I'd signed up for. I jumped like someone had lit a candle up my arse and 180'd. As I left the bedroom and made for the stairs, I looked down the world's darkest hallway dead ahead of me, and stopped dead in my tracks. Frozen to the spot, I noticed something I hadn't when I first glanced down there before. The outline of a figure, a male figure, hiding in the darkness and creeping closer. No. Not one. Two. There were two people in the shadows. One standing upright, the other crawling on its knees. I could just about make them out now that they were closer to the light seeping out of the bedroom. As I stopped and stared at them, they both froze too. "Who the fuck's there?" I shouted. A thick, male voice replied with one word. "Yasmin." I bolted down the stairs and out the front door at lightning speed, praying not to fall on my way to the car, and that there were no other surprises waiting for me outside. In what felt like a heartbeat, I was there and scrambling for my keys. I opened the driver's side door and threw myself in, flicking on the headlights and preparing to make my getaway. My lights hit the house as I turned. In the doorway was a broad man who looked like Buffalo Bill, wearing a dress and holding a hammer. And I fuck you not, next to him was a gimp. A fucking gimp in one of those terrifying masks, charging out towards my vehicle as I reversed out of there, his hands bound behind his back like he was some sort of animal. The other guy, Yasmin, was clearly the master. He stood in the doorway watching, as if he had just released the hounds on me, screaming for the gimp to not let me get away. He rammed into the side of my vehicle, his face up against the window. I could just about make out the whites of his crazed eyes behind the mask, and hear his muffled yells and laughing. He sounded like an absolute maniac. Dear God, I floored it. That gimp in full latex sprinted after me as I drove down the country road, heart beating 1,000 times a second. Thankfully, he really was only human, underneath all that skin-tight black clothing, and he soon faded out of view in my mirrors as I put pedal to the metal. I drove home faster than was legal, cracked open a beer to take the edge off, and, after some thinking, decided to call the police. They eventually got around to checking the place out. Turns out, the gimp was a live-in slave. He allowed the other guy to keep him in a cage, feed him scraps, and treat him like crap, all by choice. He had been there for months. All of the footage on the video camera in the bedroom had conveniently been deleted. God knows what those guys were recording. They played dumb to the cops about the whole thing, saying that nobody had been over that night, and that I must be lying. The cops bought their story and let them be. I know for a fact that if I hadn't hightailed it out of there when I did, I would likely have found myself in the gimp's position, only against my will. Perhaps an even worse fate would have befallen me. Who knows? The whole scenario was just so sketchy. 2 movies I can no longer watch: The Silence of the Lambs and Pulp Fiction. Damn, love those movies too. I won't be using my name, or revealing exactly where I live, in case this comes back to bite me, but I will say this took place in California. Not so long ago now, I started using this site that catered to pretty much every fetish you can think of, some obviously more popular than others. But if you could think of it, there were probably at least a few people in the community who were interested in it too. I came across a lot of these different groups on the site. S&M, that's a given. Guys who got off to girls stuck in fake quicksand. That one I'll never understand. Adults pretending to be babies. Eyeball licking. Vor. Sex with the elderly. Sex with clowns. And, of course, the dreaded furries. The one that really tickled my pickle, though, was leather. I ended up meeting a girl on the site who was into the same thing, and we actually met for coffee. It went well. So well, in fact, that we met up for a few drinks later that week. Her name was Zoe. She looked a little older in real life than in her pictures, but that's usually the case, and she was still very much my type. During the second date, I noticed this table of 4 guys who kept staring over at the 2 of us. I mentioned this to Zoe, but she didn't seem to think it was a big deal. They looked a little rough around the edges, but I put it to the back of my mind. Anyway, we both ended up getting a little drunk, and she offered for me to go back to her place. Frankly, I was too far gone at that point, and wouldn't have been able to do anything even if I wanted to. So, to her surprise, I actually declined. She seemed aggravated by the fact I said no. I guess she just thought all guys said yes to an invitation like that. In hindsight, she got a bit too angry about the whole thing, but she cooled off pretty quickly, and I selectively forgot about it. The glory of alcohol. In all honesty, I was surprised that this fetish website had led to me sort of dating a girl. I figured it would all be about hookups and one-night flings, but Zoe and I actually organised a third date. I sent her a message about getting dinner, but she messaged me saying we should skip it and get straight to the drinks. Alright, fine by me. The night started well enough. I arrived late, but Zoe looked particularly happy to see me. You smooth dog, I thought to myself. She was wearing a pair of tight leather pants. Very nice, if I do say so myself. I planned on pacing my alcohol consumption better that night, expecting another invitation from Zoe to head back to her place. I didn't plan on whiskey dicking 2 times in a row. I order a beer and drink it slowly. Around 10 minutes in, I spot those same 4 guys from last time over in the corner. I'm sure it was them. This was a completely different bar in a different part of town. Could have just been a coincidence, but I didn't like the way they kept throwing the occasional glance our way, just like the time before. Sometimes you just know something isn't right, and this was one of those times. I mentioned it again to Zoe, and we shared a laugh that those guys must be stalking us or something. We chat and flirt for around an hour, when I start to feel a little lightheaded. That's strange. At this point, I've barely drunk anything. This woozy feeling intensifies little by little, and I start to realize something's wrong. I excuse myself, and by the time I make it to the bathroom, the stalls are spinning. I fumble my way inside one of them, and force myself to vomit in the toilet. I knew what had happened. I'd been drugged. But when, and with what? I managed to call the only person I knew would help me without question, my pal Jeff. Slurring my words, I'd tell him the bar name and say I need an evac pronto. I count my lucky stars that I made that call when I did, because a few minutes later, I was so far gone I don't remember a thing. Jeff relayed to me what happened next. When Jeff arrived, I was being carried out of the bar by Zoe and some random guy. Neither appeared concerned. They were more like determined, on a mission. According to Jeff, they led me over to a van where a few other guys were waiting and were preparing to put me in the back of it. When he described the guys to me as best he could, I knew who he was talking about. Those same rough-looking guys who had been staring at Zoe and I the entire evening and the time before. These hadn't been a set of dates, they'd been a set of traps. Zoe and the Glancers were in cahoots. That explains her anger on the second meetup. She must have told those guys where she was going to take me, and was planning on leading me into an ambush. This time she wasn't taking any risks, and wanted to make sure I went along with them. She must have spiked my drink when I went to the bathroom or something. The bitch. Jeff gets out of the vehicle and rushes over, telling them he knows exactly what's going on and that he's going to call the police. He took their license plate number and pictures of the whole group with his phone. A couple of the guys start to get aggressive towards him, and Zoe's there screaming at him to fuck off, but Jeff manages to keep his cool. When a couple of late-night passers-by come along, the group lost their nerve and dumped me in the middle of the road, leaving it to Jeff to scoop me up and get me to a hospital. They took off in the other direction. I woke up in the morning with the worst headache of my life. But other than that, I was going to be fine. I gave the cops as much information as I could about Zoe, but they couldn't find a trace of her on the site, and nothing ever came of it. Knowing Jeff, I'm sure he made it sound more heroic than it really was, but I have to be honest, he really saved my ass that night. I mean, what would have happened to me if he arrived just 1 or 2 minutes later? Jeff thinks human trafficking, but I'm not so sure that happens to guys all too often. I guess it's a possibility. Another friend of mine thinks they wanted to make a snuff movie. In theory, it could have been any number of things, especially when you consider they found me through a fetish website. Personally, I don't like to think too much about it. I have a friend called Jane, who's in her early 30s. Around 2 years ago, she spent a little time on this fetish website, just checking out the scene. Turns out she was much more vanilla than she'd like to admit, and it wasn't really for her. During the few days she browsed the site, she got talking to this guy who we'll call Danny. They exchanged the usual messages, talked about kinks and that sort of stuff. At one point, Danny asked for her shoe size, which didn't really weird her out too much, as this was a fetish website, and lots of guys are into feet and that sort of stuff. But one thing Jane noticed was that Danny was very interested in whether she had any pets or not. Again, not exactly a weird thing to ask, but given the nature of the site, it seemed a little out of the blue. Well, Jane told him that she had a couple of small dogs that she adored, Pomeranians. This seemed to get Danny excited, and he proceeded to ask a plethora of questions, like their names, exact sizes, even asked for pictures. Though she didn't engage with him too much, Danny must have still felt like there was some connection between them, as he asked to meet her in person. Well, needless to say, she turned down the offer, and after that, stopped using the website altogether. It just wasn't for her. A week or so goes by. It's approaching 8 PM on a Saturday evening, and poor old Jane is home alone. That was about to change. There was a knocking on her front door, which was odd given the time. But she assumed it was one of the other residents that she was really friendly with, Karen from upstairs or something. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Karen from upstairs standing there. It was a man she had never seen before in her life. Short but stocky, beady eyes that seemed to look in different directions, and an insincere, sinister smile plastered on his face. In one of his hands, he held a bag. Can I help you?" she asked. "Hey, it's Danny. We chatted online. Do you remember?" Holy shit. Danny? Turns out this guy had actually tracked her down in real life. How he managed to find her remains unclear, but Jane must have left some form of online footprints for him to follow. Regardless, he was here now, and the only thing Jane could think to say was, "How the hell did you find me?" He just ignored the question. "May I come in?" he asked, already trying to worm his way into the apartment. Feeling very unsafe at this point, Jane instinctively tried to close the door on him, but as she did, he stuck his foot in the door, blocking it from closing. "Oh, come on, don't be a bitch about it," he said, now aggressively trying to pull the door open, Jane screaming out and desperately trying to stop him. But he was stronger, and was managing to claw his way inside. Luckily for Jane, the guy who lived in the apartment across the hall was also home that Saturday night, having a couple of beers with a friend. When they opened the door to see what all the commotion was about, They saw Danny trying to force his way into Jane's apartment, with her crying out for help. They both sprung into action, catching Danny off guard and easily overpowering him. They were able to subdue him long enough for the police to arrive. The first thing they noticed was a small plastic cage which had been left outside of Jane's apartment. It contained a live rabbit. When they finally looked in the bag that Danny had brought along, it became obvious just how close a call this whole incident had been. Inside the bag was a ball gag and tape to stop her from screaming, a pair of handcuffs, a serrated knife, bleach, and a pair of red stilettos. Danny had intended to force his way into Jane's apartment, bind and gag her, and force her to crush the bunny to death with the high heels, and, following that, her 2 small dogs. That was Danny's real fetish all along. Crush. Watching women in high heels step on animals and killing them. He'd been scoping out the place for the past 3 days ever since he found out where she lived, and since she had no idea what he looked like, she was none the wiser. He never admitted what he planned on doing with Jane after he was satisfied, but the fact that he brought a knife along with him doesn't leave much to the imagination. Thankfully, his plan hadn't been well thought through, so it all came crumbling down around him. It amazes me to think that there are some sick bastards like this in the world. I mean, it's one thing to fantasize about messed up shit, but another to actually try and act on it. Thankfully, Danny's behind bars as we speak, and after hearing this story, I for one have stayed well away from websites like that. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, that was an unexpected topic. I was trying to brainstorm ideas I haven't covered yet, and I must have been in one of those moods, because this is what came to my mind immediately. Maybe that just says a lot about me, I don't know. Oh, I know, fetish stories. Oh, the life I lead. Now, I have a mission for all of you who've stuck it out this far. I want you all to go on down south and do some naughty, naughty things with that like button. You know what to do. Don't make me bring out the GIMP now. Anyway guys, as I said, thank you very much for listening, and I'll have some more videos coming your way very, very soon. Until then, you stay spooky, Lazy Legion. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.